Welcome back to Storytime. Doing part 3 of The Secret Garden and what I did last night. I made little bookmarks. There's a link down below in the About Me section to my Twitter thing, whereas both of the images you can print them back to front, and it has all the information except for YouTube because that's a ridiculously long address with a whole bunch of letters and numbers. At like 100 followers, then I can put Storytime Sunny at the end. Anyways, good news. I'm got approved for a loan to get a new computer, so now streams can be less choppy, and I also have a new webcam coming, so no more newness of the video. Excited about that. Anyway, go ahead and jump right into it. Chapter 12. Might I have a bit of earth? Mary ran so fast that she was red when she reached her room. Her hair was ruffled on her forehead and her cheeks were bright pink on the table, and Martha was waiting near it. "That's a bit late," she said. "I've seen Dickon," said Mary. "I've seen Dickon." "I knew he'd come," very exultantly. "How does thou like him?" I think he's beautiful," in a determined voice. Martha looked rather taken aback, but she looked pleased too. Said, "He's the best lad as ever was born, but I never thought he was hand whose turns up too much." "I like it to turn up," said Mary. "And his eyes is so brown, Martha, a trifle doubtful." They're a nice color round," said Mary, "and they are exactly the color of the sky over the moor." Martha backed. "Father says he made that color with always looking up the clouds. But he has such a big mouth, hasn't he, now?" "I love his big mouth," said Lee. "I wish mine were just like it." Martha chuckled delightedly. "It's funny in thy bit of face," she said, "but I knowed it would be that way when... How did thou like the seeds and the garden tools?" "How did you know he brought them?" said Mary. "I never thought of him much bringing 'em. He'd be sure to bring 'em if they was in Yorkshire. He's such a trusty lad." Mary was afraid that she might begin to ask difficult questions, but she did not. She was very interested in the seeds and gardening tools, and there was only one moment when Mary was frightened, and she began to ask where the flowers were to be planted. "Who did ask about it?" "I haven't asked anybody yet," said Mary, hesitating. "I wouldn't ask the head. He's too grand, Mr. Roach is." "I've never seen him," said Mary. "I've only seen under gardeners and Weatherstaff." "If I was you, I'd ask Ben Weatherstaff," advised Martha. "He's not hooked, for he's so crabbed. Mr. Craven lets him do what he likes because Craven was alive, and he used to make her laugh. She liked him. Find you a corner somewhere out of the way." "If it was out of the way and no one wanted it, no one could have it, could they?" Mary asked anxiously. "There wouldn't be no reason," answered Martha. "It wouldn't do no harm." Mary ate her dinner as quickly as she could, and when she rose, going to run to her room and put on her hat again, and Martha stopped her. "I've got something to tell you. I thought I'd let you eat your dinner first. Mr. Craven came back this morning, and I think he wants to see..." Mary turned quite pale. "Oh," she said, "why? Why? He didn't want to see me when I came. I heard Pritchard say he didn't." "Well," explained Martha, "Medlock says it's because of Mother. She was walking to Thwaite Valley when she met him. She'd never spoken to him before, but Mrs. Craven had been to our cottage to her. He forgot, but Mother hadn't, and she made bold to stop him. I don't know what she said about you, but she said something has put him in the mind to see you before he goes tomorrow." "Oh," cried Mary, "is he going away again tomorrow? Glad. He's going for a long time. He mayn't come back till autumn or winter. He's going foreign places. He's always doing it." "Oh, I'm so glad," said Lee. "If he did not come back until winter, or even autumn, there would be the secret garden come alive. Even if he found out then and took it away from her, he would have had that much at least." "When do you want to see me?" She did not finish the sentence because the door opened and Mrs. Medlock walked in. She had on her best black dress and cap, and her collar was fastened with a little large picture of a man's face on it. It was a colored photograph of Mr. Medlock, who had died years ago. She always wore it when she was dressed up. She looked nervous and excited. "Your hair's rough," she said. "Martha, help her to slip on her best dress. Mr. Craven wants me to bring her to see him in his study." All the pink left Mary's cheeks. Her heart began to thump, and she felt herself change to a plain, silent child again. She did not even answer Mrs. Medlock, but turned in the bedroom, followed by Martha. She said nothing while her dress was changed and her hair brushed and quite tidy. She followed Mrs. Medlock down the corridor in silence. What was there for her? She was obliged to go and see Mr. Craven, and he would not like her, and she would not like him. What she knew what he would think of her. She was taken to a part of the house she knew to before. At last Mrs. Medlock knocked at a door, and when someone said, entered the room together. The man was sitting in an armchair before the fire, and Mrs. Medlock spoke to him. "This is Miss Mary, sir," she said. "You can go and leave her here. I will ring for you to take her away," said Mr. Craven. When she went out and closed the door, Mary stand waiting, a plain little thing, twisting her thin hands together. She could see that the man was so much a hunchback as a man with high, rather crooked shoulders, and he was streaked with white. He turned his head over his high shoulders and said, "Come here," he said. Mary went to him. He was not ugly. His face handsome if it had not been so miserable. He looked as though worried and fretted him, and as if he did not know what in the world to do with her. "You well?" he asked. "Yes," answered Mary. "Do they take good care of you?" "Yes." He rubbed his forehead fretfully as he looked over her. "You are very thin," he said. "Getting fatter," Mary answered in what she knew was her stiffest way. What an unhappy his black eyes seemed as if they scarcely saw her, and if they were seeing as if something else, and he could hardly keep his thoughts upon her. "I forgot you. How could I remember you? I intended to send you a governess or a nurse of that sort, but I forgot. Please," began Mary. "Please," and then the lump in her. "What do you want to say?" he inquired. I'm too big for a nurse. Please don't make me have a governess yet." He rubbed his forehead again and stared at her. "That was what the Sowerby woman said," he muttered absent-mindedly. Then Mary scrapped with courage. Is she Martha's mother?" she stammered. "Yes, I think so." "She knows about children," said Mary. "She has 12. She knows." He seemed to rouse himself. "What do you want to do?" "I want to play outdoors," Mary answered, hoping that her voice did not tremble. "I know, yet it makes me hungry here, and I'm getting fatter." He was watching her. "Sowerby said it would do you good. Perhaps it will," he said. "She thought you had better get strong, governess." "It makes me feel strong when I play, and the wind comes over the moor," argued Mary. "Where do you play?" he asked next. "Everywhere," gasped Mary. "Martha's mother sent me a skip and run, and I look about to see if things are beginning to stick up out of the earth. I don't do any harm." Don't look so frightened," he said in a worried voice. "You could not do any harm. You may do what you like." Mary put her hand up to her throat because she was afraid she'd see the excited lump which she felt jumped into it. She came a step nearer to him. "May I?" she said tremulously. Her anxious little face seemed to worry him more. "Don't look so frightened," he exclaimed. "Of course you may. I am your guardian, though I am of you need. I sent for you today because Mrs. Sowerby said I ought to see you. Has talked about you. She thought you needed fresh air and freedom and running about." "Children," Mary said again in spite of herself. "She ought to," said Mr. Craven. "Rather bold to stop me on the moor, but she said Mr. Craven had been kind to her." It seemed hard for him to speak his dead wife's name. "She is a responsible woman. Now I have seen you, I think she has said sensible things. Play out as much as you like. It's a big place, and you may go anywhere you like and amuse yourself as you like. Is there anything?" As if a sudden thought had struck him. "Do you want toys, books, dolls?" "My," quavered Mary. "Might I have a bit of earth?" In her eagerness she did not know how queer the words would sound, and that they were not the ones she had meant to say. Craven looked quite startled. "Earth?" he repeated. "What do you mean?" "To plant seeds in, growth, to see them come alive," Mary faltered. He gazed at her a moment and then passed his eyes. "Do you care about gardens so much?" he said slowly. "I didn't know about them in India," said Mary. "I was always ill and tired, and it was too hot. Sometimes beds in the sand stuck flowers in them, but here it is different." Mr. Craven got up and slowly around the room. "Bit of earth," he said to himself, and Mary thought that something must have reminded him of something. When he stopped and spoke to her, his dark eyes soft and kind. "You can have as much earth as you want," he said. "You have someone else who loved the earth and things that grow. When you see a bit of earth you want, with something like a smile, take it, child, and make it come alive." "May I take it from anywhere, if it's not wanted?" "Anywhere," he answered. "There! You must go tired." He touched the bell to call Mrs. Medlock. "Goodbye, I shall be away all." Mrs. Medlock came so quickly that Mary thought she must have been waiting in the corridor. "Mrs. Medlock," Mr. Craven said to her, "now I have seen the child, I understand what Mrs. Sowerby. She must be less delicate before she begins lessons. Give her simple help, let her run wild in the garden. Don't look after her too much. She needs liberty and fresh air and rock. Mrs. Sowerby is to come and see her now and then, and she may sometimes go to the cottage." Medlock looked pleased. She was relieved to hear that she need not look after Mary too much. She had left her a tiresome charge, and had indeed of her as she dared. In addition to this, she was fond of Martha's mother. "You, sir," she said, "Susan Sowerby and me went to school together, and she's as sensible and good-hearted as you'd find in a day's walk. I never had any children myself, and she's had never was healthier or better ones. Miss Mary can get no harm from them. I'd always take his advice about children myself. She's what you might call healthy-minded, if you understand." "I understand," Mr. Craven answered. "Take Miss Mary away now and send Pitcher to me." When Mrs. Medlock left her at the end of her own corridor, Mary flew back to her. She found Martha waiting there. Martha had, in fact, hurried back after she had removed the dinner service. "I can have my garden," cried Mary. "I may have it where I like. I am not going to have a governess for a mother is coming to see me, and I may go to your cottage. He says a little girl like me could harm. I may do what I like anywhere." "Hey," said Martha idly, "that was nice of him, wasn't it?" "Martha," said Mary solemnly, "he is Reed's man, only his face is so miserable, and his forehead is all drawn together." She ran into the garden. She had been away so much longer than she had thought she would, and she knew Dickon would have to set up early on his 5-mile walk. When she saw her under the ivy, she saw he was not working where she had left him. The gardening tools were laid together under a tree. She ran to them, looking all around the place, but there was no Dickon to be seen. And the secret garden was empty, except for the robin, who had just flown across the wall and sat on the rose bush, watching her. "He's gone," she said woefully. "Oh, was he only a wood fairy?" Something white fastened to his white standard rose bush caught her eye. It was a piece of paper, in fact. It was a piece of the letter she had printed for Mary to send to Dickon. It was fastened on the thorn, and in a minute she knew Dickon had left it to her. There was some roughly printed and a sort of picture. At first she could not tell what it was. Then she saw it was meant for the bird sitting on it. Underneath were the printed letters, and they said, "I will." Chapter 13. I Am Colin. Mary took the picture back to the house where she went to her supper, and she showed it to Martha. "Eh," said Martha with great pride, "I never knew our Dickon was as clever as that. There's a thrush in her nest, as large as life and twice as natural." Then Mary knew Dickon had meant the picture to be a message. He had meant that he would keep her secret. Her garden was her nest, and she was like a missile thrush. Oh, how she did like that queer common boy. She hoped he would come back the very she fell asleep looking forward to the morning. But you never know what the weather will do in Yorkshire, particularly in the springtime. She was awakened in the night by the sound of rain beating with heavy dry snow. It was pouring down in torrents, and the wind was wuthering round the corners and in the huge old house. Mary sat up in bed and felt miserable and angry. "As contrary as ever I was," she said. "I came because it knew I did not want it, threw herself back on her pillow and buried her face. She did not cry, but she lay and hated this heavily beating rain. She hated the wind and its wuthering. She could not go to sleep again. The sound kept her awake because she felt mournful herself. And if she had felt happy, it would have lulled her to sleep. How it wuthered, and how the big raindrops poured down in pain. Sounds just like a person lost on the moor and wandering on and on, crying. She had been lying awake, turning from side to side for about an hour when suddenly her sit up in bed and turn her head toward the door, listening. She listened, and she listened. It isn't the wind now, she said in a loud whisper. That isn't the wind. It is different. It is heard before. The door of her room was ajar, and the sound came down the corridor, a faint sound of fretful crying. She listened for a few minutes, and each minute she became more and more sure. She felt as if she must find out what it was, even stranger than the secret garden and the buried key. Perhaps that the fact perhaps the fact in a rebellious mood made her bold. She put her foot out of bed and stood on the floor. Find out what it is, she said. Everybody is in bed, and I don't care about Mrs. Medlock. I don't care. There was a candle by her bedside, and she took it up and went softly out of the room. The corridor was long and dark, but she was too excited to mind that. She thought she must turn to find the short passage with the door covered with tapestry, the one Mrs. Medlock knew the day she lost herself. The sound had come up that corridor. So she went on in light, almost feeling her way, her heart beating so loud that she fancied she could hear it. A faint crying went on and led her. Sometimes it stopped for a moment or so, and then began. Was this the right corner to run? To turn? She stopped, and thus it was. Down this passage, and then to the left, and then up two broad steps, and then, yes, there was the tapestry door. She pushed it open very gently and closed it behind. And she stood in the corridor and could hear the crying quite plainly, though it was not. It was on the other side of the wall, at her left, and a few yards farther on there was a door. She could see a glimmer of light coming from beneath it, and someone was carrying in that room, and it was quite a young someone. So she walked to the door and pushed it open. It was staying in the room. It was a big room with ancient, handsome furniture in it. There was a lamp glowing faintly on the hearth, and a night light burning on the side of a carved four-poster bed, and on the bed was lying a boy crying fretfully. Many wondered if she was in a real Mary wondered if she was in a real place, or if she was asleep again, and was dreaming without knowing it. The boy had a sharp, delicate face, ivory, and he seemed to have eyes too big for it. He had also a lot of hair over his forehead in heavy locks, and made his thin face seem smaller. He looked a bit ill, but he was crying more as if he were tired and cross than he were in pain. Mary stood near the door with her candle in her hand. Then she crept across the room, and as she drew nearer, the light attracted the boy as he turned his head on his pillow and stared at her, his gray eyes opening so wide that they seemed. "Who are you?" he said at last in a half-frightened whisper. "Are you a—" "No, I'm not," Mary answered, her own whisper sounding half-frightened. "Are you one?" He stared and stared and stared. Mary could not help noticing what strange eyes. They were agate gray, and they looked too big for his face because they had black lashes all round them. "No," he replied after waiting a moment or so. "Who's Colin?" she faltered. "I'm Colin Craven. Who are you?" "I'm Mary Lennox. Mr. Craven is my uncle." "He is my father," said the boy. "Your father?" asked Mary. "No one ever told me he had a boy. Why didn't they?" "Come here," he said, his strange eyes fixed on her with an anxious expression. She came close to the bed, and he put out and touched her. "You are real, aren't you?" he said. "They're such real gentlemen. You might be one of them." Mary had slipped on a wooden wrapper before she left her room, and she put a piece of it between his fingers. "Rub that warm it is," she said. "I'll pinch you a little if you like to show you how real I am. For a minute I've been a dream too." "Where did you come from?" he asked. "From my own room, so I couldn't go to sleep, and I heard someone crying, and wanted to find out who it was." "What were you crying?" "Because I couldn't go to sleep either, and my head ached. Tell me your name again." Lennox. Did no one ever tell you I had come to live here?" He was still fingering of her wrapper, but he began to look a little more as if he believed in her reality. "No," he answered, "they daren't." "Why?" asked Mary. "Because I should have been see me. I won't let people see me and talk me over." "Why?" Mary asked, more mystified every moment. "Because I am like this always, ill and having to lie down. My father won't let people talk me over either. The servants are not allowed to speak about me. I may be a hunchback, but I shan't live. My father hates to think I may be like him." "House this is," Mary said. "What a queer house! Everything is a kind of a secret. We're locked up, and gardens are locked up, and you! Have you been locked up?" "No, I stay in this room to be moved out of it. It tires me too much." "Does your father come and see you?" Mary. "Sometimes. Generally when I am asleep. He doesn't want to see me." "Why?" I could not help asking again. A sort of angry shadow passed over the boy's face. "My mother died when I was born, and it makes him wretched to look at me. He'd know, but I have heard people talking. He almost hates me." "He hates that she died," said Mary, half speaking to herself. "What garden?" the boy asked. "Oh, just a garden she used to like," Mary stammered. "Have you been here always?" "Sometimes I have been taken to places at the seaside, but I won't stay because people. I used to wear an iron thing to keep my back straight, but a grand doctor came from London to see me stupid. He told them to take it off and keep me out in the fresh air. I hate fresh air. Go out." "I didn't when I first came here," said Mary. "Why do you keep it like that?" "Because of the dreams that are so real," he whispered mechanically. "Sometimes when I open my eyes, I don't believe I am awake," said Mary. She glanced round the room with its high ceiling and shadowy corners and dim fire. "It looks quite like a dream. And it's the middle of the night, and everybody in the house is asleep, everybody but us. But we are wide awake." "I don't want it to be," the boy said restlessly. Mary thought of something all at once. "If you don't like people to see in, do you want me to go away?" He still held the fold of her wrapper in pull. "No," he said. "I should be sure you were a dream if you went. If you are real, sit down on that big footstool and talk. I want to hear about you." Her candle on the table near the bed and sat down on the cushioned stool. She did not want to go. She wanted to stay in this mysterious hidden away room and talk to the mysterious boy. "What do you want me to tell you?" she said. He wanted to know about how long she had been at Miss. He wanted to know which corridor her room was on. He wanted to know what she had been doing, if she liked the moor as he disliked it, where she had lived before she came to Yorkshire. He answered all these questions and many more, and he lay back on his pillow and listened. He made her feel about India and about her voyages across the ocean. She found out that being an invalid, he had not learned things as other children had. One verses had taught him to read when he was quite little, and he was always in pictures and splendid books. Though his father rarely saw him when he had given all sorts of wonderful things to amuse himself with. He never seemed to have been however. He could have anything he asked for, and he never made to do anything he did not. "Everyone is obliged to do what pleases me." He said it differently, being ill to be angry. "No one believes I shall live to grow up." He said it as if he was so accustomed to the idea that it ceased to matter to him at all, like the sound of Mary's voice. As she went on talking, he listened in a drowsy interval. Once or twice she wondered if he were not gradually falling into a doze. At last he asked a question which opened up a new subject. "How old are you?" he asked. Answered Mary, forgetting herself for the moment. "And so are you." "How do you know that?" in a surprised voice. "Because when you were born, the garden door was locked, and the key has been buried locked, and it has been locked for 10 years." Colin half sat up, turning toward her, leaning on his elbow. "What garden locked? Who did it? Where's the key buried?" he exclaimed, as if he were suddenly very much interested. "It was the garden Mr. Craven hates," said Mary nervously. "He locked the door. No one knew where he buried the key." "What sort of a garden is it?" Colin proceeded. No one has been allowed to go into it for 10 years, was Mary's careful answer. But it was too late to be careful. He was too much like herself. He, too, had had nothing to think about, and the idea of a hidden garden attracted him as it had attracted her. He asked question after question. Where was it? Had she never looked for the door? He never asked the gardeners. They won't talk about it, said Mary. I think they have been told not to. I would make them, said Colin. Could you? Mary faltered, beginning to. If he could make people answer questions, who knew what might happen? Obliged to please me, I told you that, he said. If I were to live, this place would sometimes belong to me. They all know that. I would make them tell me. Mary had not known what she herself had been spoiled, but she could see quite plainly that this mysterious boy had been. He thought that the whole world belonged to him. How peculiar he was, and how coolly not living. Do you think you won't live? She asked, partly because she was curious in hope of making him forget the garden. I don't suppose I shall, he answered as he had spoken before. Ever since I remember, anything I have heard people say, I shan't. At first they too little to understand, and now they think I don't hear. But I do. My doctor is my father's cousin. He is quite poor, and if I die, he will have all Mistletoe instead. I should think he wouldn't want me to live. Do you want to live, Mary? No, he answered in a cross, tired fashion. But I don't want to die. Will I lie here and think about it until I cry and cry? I heard you crying 3 times, Mary said, but I did not know who it was. Were you crying about that? I dare say, he answered. About something else. Talk about that garden. Don't you want to see it? Yes, in a quite low voice. I do, insistently. I don't think I ever really wanted to see any before, but I want to see that garden. I want the key they dug up. I want the door unlocked. I would let them take me there, and that would be getting fresh air. I'm going to make them open the door. I'm quite excited, and his strange eyes began to shine like stars and looked more immense. They have to please me, he said. I will make them take me there, and I will too. Mary's hands clutched each other. Everything would be spoiled. Dickon would never come back. She would never again feel like a missile through a safe hidden nest. Oh, don't do that! She cried out. He stared at, as if he thought she might. He stared as if she had gone crazy. Why? He exclaimed. You said you wanted to see it. I do, she answered, sob in her throat. But if you make them open the door and take you in like that, it would make the garden. He leaned still further forward. A secret. What do you mean? Tell me. Mary's words almost tumbled over one another. You see, she panted. If no one knows but there was a door hidden somewhere under the ivy. If there was, and if we could slip through it together and shut it behind us, and no one knew anyone was inside our garden, and pretended that we were mistle thrushes and it was our nest, and lived there almost every day and dug and planted seeds and made it all come alive. Is it dead? He interrupted. It soon will be if no one cares for it, she went on. The bulbs will live, but the roses. He stopped her again, as excited as she was herself. Putting quickly. They are daffodils and lilies and snowdrops. They are working in the earth now, green points, because the spring is coming. Is the spring coming? He said. What is it? You don't see it in rooms if you are ill. It is the sun shining on the rain, on the sunshine, and things pushing up and working under the earth, said Mary. If the garden was a secret, get into it, we could watch the things growing bigger every day, and roses are alive. Don't you see? You don't. Oh, don't you see how much it would be if it was a secret? He dropped back on his pillow and lay there with an odd expression. I never had a secret, he said, except that one about not living up. They don't know I know that, so it is a sort of secret. But I like this kind. If you won't make them take you to the garden, pleaded Mary. "Perhaps I feel almost sure that I can find out how to get in sometime, and then I want you to go out in your chair, and if you can always do what you want to do, perhaps we might find some boy who would push you, and we could go alone, and it would always be garden." "I should like that," he said very slowly, his eyes looking dreamy. "I should like that. I should not mind fresh air in a secret garden." He would recover his breath and feel safer because the idea of keeping the secret garden seemed to please him. She felt almost sure that if she kept on talking and could make the garden in his mind as she had seen it, he would like it so much that she could dare to think that everybody might tramp into it when they chose. "I'll think it would be like if you could go into it," she said. "It has been shut up so long into a tangle, perhaps." He lay quite still and listened while she went on talking which might have clambered from tree to tree and hung down, about the many birds which might have built their nests there because it was so safe, and told him about the robin and Ben Weatherstaff and what he was there. There was so much to tell about the robin, and it was so easy and safe to talk about it that she was afraid. The robin pleased him so much that he smiled until he looked almost beautiful. First, Mary had thought that he was even plainer than herself, with his big eyes and heavy locks. "I did not know birds could be like that," he said. "But if you stay and see things, what a lot of things you know. I feel as if you had been inside that garden." She did not know what to say, so she did not say anything. He evidently did not expect her, and the next moment he gave her a surprise. "I'm going to let you look at something," he said. "You see that rose-colored silk curtain hanging on the wall over the mantelpiece?" Mary had before, but she looked up and saw it. It was a curtain of soft silk hanging over what seemed a picture. "Yes," she answered. "There's a cord hanging from it," said Colin. Mary got up, much mystified, and found the cord. When she pulled it, the silk ran back on rings, and when it ran back, it uncovered a picture. It was a girl with a laughing face. She had bright hair tied up with a blue ribbon, and her gay eyes were exactly like Colin's unhappy ones, agate gray and looking twice as big as they were because of the black lashes all round them. "She's my mother," said Colin. "I don't see why she died. Sometimes I hate her for doing it." "How queer! If she had lived, I believe I should not have have been ill always. I dare say I should have lived too, and my father would not have hated to look at me. Say I should have had a strong back. Draw the curtain again." Mary did and returned to her footstool. "She is you," she said, "but her eyes are just like yours. At least they are the same shape and color. I'm over it." He moved uncomfortably. "I may do it," he said. "Sometimes I don't like looking at me. She smiles too much when I am ill and miserable. Besides, she is mine when to see her." There were a few moments of silence, and then Mary spoke. Medlock, what would Mrs. Medlock do if she found out that I had been here?" he inquired. "She would do as I told her to do," he answered. "And I should tell her that I come back and talk to me every day. I'm glad you came." "So am I," said Mary, "as often as I can, but—" she hesitated. "I shall have to look every day for—" "Yes, you must," said Colin, "and you can tell me about it afterward." He lay thence as he had done before, and then he spoke again. "I think you shall be a secret too," he said. "I will not tell them until they find out I'm the nurse out of the room, and say that I want to be by myself. Do you know Martha?" "Very well," said Mary. "She waits on me." He nodded his head toward the outer corridor. "She is the one who is asleep in the other room. The nurse went away yesterday to stay all night with her, and she always makes Martha attend to me when she wants to go out. Martha shall tell you when to—" Then Mary understood Martha's troubled look when she had asked questions about the crying. "Martha knew about you all this time?" she said. "Yes, she often attends to me. The nurse takes from me, and then Martha comes." "I have been here a long time," said Mary. "Shall I go away now? Your eyes look sleepy." "I wish I could go to sleep before you leave me," shyly. Shut your eyes, said Mary, drawing her foot still closer. Do what my ayah used to do in India. I will pat your hand and stroke it and sing something. I should like that, perhaps, he said drowsily. Somehow she was sorry for him to lie awake, so she leaned against the bed and began to stroke and pat his hand and sing a little chanting song in Hindustani. That is nice, he said more drowsily, and she went on chanting and stroking. But when she looked at him again, lashes were lying close against his cheeks, for his eyes were shut and he was asleep. So she got up softly, took her candle, and crept away with sound. Chapter 14. A Young Rajah. The moor was hidden in mist when the morning came, and the rain had not stopped pouring down. They came out of doors. Martha was so busy that Mary had no opportunity of talking to her, but she asked her to come and sit with her in the nursery. She came bringing the stocking she was knitting when she was doing nothing else. What's the matter with thee? She asked, sat down. Thou looks as thou'd something to say. I have. What was the crying was, she said. Martha let her on her knee and gazed at her with startled eyes. Thou hasn't, she exclaimed. Never. Right, Mary went on, and I got up and I went to see where it came from. It was Colin. I found. Martha's eyes went red with fright. Ah, Miss Mary, she said, half crying. Wait, that shouldn't. Thou'll get me in trouble. I never told thee nothing about him. But I shall lose my place, and what'll mother do? You won't lose your place, said Mary. He was glad. We talked, and he said he was glad I came. See? Cried Martha. Thou doesn't know what he's like when anything vexes him. He's a big lad like a baby, but when he's in a passion, he'll fair scream just to frighten us. He knows us daren't call our souls our own. He wasn't vexed, said Mary. He asked him if I should go away, and he made me stay. He asked me questions, and I sat on a big footstool and talked to him and about the robin and gardens. He wouldn't let me go. He let me mother's picture. Before I left, I sang him to sleep. Martha fairly gasped. I can scarcely believe thee, she protested. It's as if thou'd walked a lion's den. If he'd been like he is most times, he'd have thrown himself into one of his and roused the house. He won't let strangers look at him. He let me. I looked at him all the time, and he looked at me. He stared, said Mary. I don't know what to do, agitated Martha. If Mrs. Medlock finds out, she'll think I broke orders and told me, and I shall beat the mother. He is not going to tell Mrs. Medlock anything about it yet. It's to be secret just at first, said Mary. And he says everybody is obliged to do as Aye, that's true enough. The bad lad, sighed Martha, wiping her forehead. He says Mrs. Medlock must, and he wants me to come and talk to him every day, to tell me when he wants me. Me? Said Martha. I shall for sure. You can't if you're doing what he wants you to do. He is ordered to obey him, Mary argued. Does that mean to say, cried Martha, wide open eyes, that he was nice to thee? I think he almost liked me. Then that must have bewitched him, declared Martha, drawing a long breath. You mean magic? Inquired Mary. I've heard about magic in India, but I can't make it. I just room, and I was so surprised to see him, I stood and stared, and then he turned around and stared at me as a ghost or a dream, and I thought perhaps he was. And it was so queer being there alone to the middle of the night and not knowing about each other, and we began to ask each other questions. And if I must go away, he said I must not. The world's coming to an end, Jack. What is the matter with him? Asked Mary. Nobody knows for sure and certain. Mr. Craven went off his head like when he was born. The dog'd have to be put in an asylum. It was because Mrs. Craven died like I told you. Set eyes on the baby. He just raved and said it'd be another hunchback like him and it'd better die. Is Colin a hunchback? Mary asked. He didn't look like one. He isn't yet, but he began all wrong. Mother said there was enough trouble and raging in the house to child wrong. They was afraid his back was weak, and they've always been taking care of it, laying down and not letting him walk. Once they made him wear a brace, but he fretted so he was ill. Then a big doctor came to see him and made him take it off. He talked to doctors quite rough, in a police way. He said they'd been too much, met too much letting him have his own way. I think he's a very spoiled boy. He's the worst young nowt as it ever was, said Martha. I won't one hasn't been ill a good bit. He's had coughs and colds that's nearly killed him too. Once he had rheumatic fever, and once he had typhoid. Mrs. Medlock did get a fright then. He'd been out of his head, and she was talking to the nurse, thinking he didn't know nothing. She said, "He'll die this time, sure, and best things for him and for." And she looked at him, and there he was with his big eyes open, staring at her as since she was herself. She didn't know what happened, and he just stared at her. "You give me some water and stop talking." "Do you think he will die?" Mother says there's no reason why any child should live that gets no fresh air and doesn't do nothing back and read picture books and take medicine. He's weak and hates the trouble of being indoors. And he gets cold so easy he says it makes him ill. Mary looked at the fire. "I wonder," she said softly, if it would do him good to get into and watch things growing. "It did me good." "One of the worst fits he ever had," said one time they took him out where the roses is by the fountain. He's been reading the paper about people getting something called rose cold, and he began to sneeze. Said he got it, and then a new gardener as didn't know the rules passed at him curious. He threw himself into a passion, and he said they looked at him because he was going to be a hunchback. He cried himself into a fever and was all ill all night. "If he gets angry at me, I'll never go and see him again," said Mary. "If he wants thee," said Martha. "Thas may well know what that at the start." Very soon afterwards a bell rang, and she rolled up her knitting. "I dare say the nurse wants me to stay with him a bit," she said. "I hope he's in a good temper." She was out of the room about 10 minutes, and then came back with a puzzled expression. "Well, that," she said. "He's up on his sofa with his picture books. He told the nurse to stay away until I am to wait in the next room. The minute she has gone, he called me to I want Mary Lennox to come and talk to me. And remember you're not to tell anyone. You'd better can." Mary was quite willing to go quickly. She did not want to see Colin as much as Dickon, but she wanted to see him very much. There was a bright fire on the hearth. She entered his room, and in the daylight she saw it was a very beautiful room indeed. There was in the rugs and hangings and pictures and books on the wall, and which made it look glowing and comfortable, even in spite of the grey sky and falling rain. Colin looked rather like a picture himself. He was wrapped in a velvet dressing gown and sat in a brocade cushion. He had a red spot on each cheek. "Come in," he said, "thinking about you all morning." "I've been thinking about you too," answered Mary. "Frightened Martha is. She says Mrs. Medlock will think she told me about you, and then she will be sent away." He frowned. "Go and tell her to come here," he said. "She is in the next room." He brought her back. Poor Martha was shaking in her shoes. Colin was still frowning. "To do what I please, or have you not?" he demanded. "I have to do what you please, sir." Martha looked quite red. "Has Medlock to do what I please?" "Everyone has, sir," said Martha. "Then, if I order you to bring Miss Mary to me, how can Mrs. Medlock send you away if she's out?" "Please don't tell her, sir," pleaded Martha. "I'll send her away if she dared about such a thing," said Master Craven grandly. "She wouldn't like that, I do." "Thank you, sir," bobbing a curtsy. "I'm going to do my duty, sir." "Is your duty," said Colin more grandly still. "I'll take care of you. Now go." When the door closed behind Martha, Colin found Mistress Mary gazing at him as if he had set her wondering. "Why do you look at me like that?" he asked her. "What are you?" "I'm thinking about two things." "What are they?" "Sit down and tell me." "This is the first one," said Mary, sitting herself on the big stool. "Once in India I saw a boy who was a Raj. He had rubies and emeralds and diamonds stuck all over him. He spoke to his people just as you said. Everybody had to do exactly to do everything he told them. Minute. I think they would have been killed if they hadn't. I shall make you tell me about Rajas, he said, but first tell me what the second thing was. I was thinking, Mary, how different you are from Dickon. Who is Dickon? He said. What a queer name. She might as well tell him, she thought. She could talk about Dickon without mentioning the secret garden. She had liked to hear Martha talk about him because she longed to talk about him. It would seem to bring him nearer. He is Martha's brother. He is 12 years old. He is not like anyone else in the world. He can charm foxes and squirrels and birds. The natives in India charm snakes. He plays a very soft tune on a pipe, and there were some big books on a table at his side, and he dragged one with him. There's a picture of a snake charmer in this, he exclaimed. Come and look at it. The book went with superb colored illustrations, and he turned to one of them. Can he asked eagerly. He played on his pipe and they listened, Mary exclaimed. But he doesn't cope. He says it's because he lives on the moor so much and he knows their ways. He says he feels sometimes as if he was a bird or a rabbit himself. He likes them so. I think he asked the robin questions. It seemed as if they talked to each other in soft chirps. Back on his cushion, and his eyes grew larger and larger, and the spots in his cheeks burned. More about him, he said. He knows all about eggs and nests, Mary went on, and he says in badgers and otters live. He keeps them secret so the other boys won't find their holes. He knows about everything that grows or lives on the moor. Does he like them? Said Colin. How can he when it's such a great, bare, dreary place? It's the most beautiful place, protested Mary. Thousands of lovely things grow, and there are thousands of little creatures all busy building nests and making holes and burrows and singing or squeaking to each other. They were so busy and having such fun in the trees or heather. It's their world. How do you know all that? Colin, turning on his elbow to look at her. I have never been there once, really, said Mary, suddenly remembering. I only drove over it in the dark. I thought it was hideous. Margaret first and then Dickon. When Dickon talks about it, you feel as if you saw things, and as if you were standing in the heather with the sun shining and the gorse smelling, and all full of bees and butterflies. You never see anything if you are ill, and restlessly. He looked like a person listening to a nuisance and wondering what it was. You can't if you stay in a room, said Mary. Go on the moor, he said in a resentful tone. Mary was silent for a minute, and then she said bold. You might sometime. He moved as if he were startled. Go? How could I? I'm going to die. How do you know? Said Mary unsympathetically. She knew he had of talking about dying. She did not feel very. She felt rather as if he almost boasted about it. Oh, I've heard it ever since he answered crossly. They're always whispering about it and thinking I don't notice. I would, too. Mistress Mary felt quite contrary. She pinched her lips together. But I would, she said. I wouldn't. Who wishes you would? The servants, and of course Given, because he would get Misselthwaite and be rich instead of poor. But he always looks cheerful when I am worse. When I had typhoid fever, his face fat. I think my father wishes it too. I don't believe he does, said Mary quite. That made Colin turn and look at her again. Don't you? He said. And then he lay and was still, as if he were thinking. And there was quite a long silence. Perhaps they were thinking strange things children do not usually think of. A doctor from London, because he made them take the iron thing off, said Mary at last. Did he say you were going to die? No. What did he say? He didn't whisper. Perhaps he knew I hated whispering. I heard him say one thing about, he said, the lad might live if he would make up his mind to it. Put him in the, it sounded as if he was in a temper. I'll tell you who oh goodness, I'll tell you who would put you in the humor, said Mary, reflecting. She felt as if she would like this thing to be settled with her. I believe Dickon would. He's always talking about live things. I never talks about things or things that are ill. He's always looking up in the sky to watch birds flying or the earth to see something growing. He has such round blue eyes, and they're so wide and open out, and he laughs such a big laugh with his wide mouth, and his cheeks are as red as cherries. She pulled her stool nearer to the sofa, and her expression quite changed of the wide curving mouth and the wide open eyes. See here, she said, don't let us talk about dying. I don't like it. Let us talk about Dickon, and then we will look at your picture. It was the best thing she could have said. To talk about Dickon meant to talk about the moor and the 14 people who lived in it on 16 shillings a week, and the children who got more grass like the wild ponies, and about Dickon's mother and the skipping rope with the sun on it, and about pale green points sticking up out of the black sod. And it was that Mary talked more than she had ever talked before, and Colin both talked and as he had never done before either. Oh, goodness, hold on just a moment. Sorry about that. It wasn't actually anybody's spam calls. Oh, goodness, I'm dropping things. I'll backtrack a little. Sorry about that again. It was the best thing that could have been said. To talk about Dickon meant to talk about the moor and about the cottage and the 14 in it on 16 shillings a week, and the children who got fat on the moor grass like the wild, and about Dickon's mother and the skipping rope and the moor with the sun on it, and about pale green sticking up out of the black sod. And it was all so alive that Mary talked more than she had ever talked, and Colin both talked and listened as he had never done before either. And they both began to laugh as children will when they are happy together. And they laughed so that in the end they were noised as if they had been two ordinary, healthy, natural 10-year-old children, instead of a hard little unloving girl and a sickly boy who believed that he was going to die. They enjoyed themselves so much that they forgot the pictures and they forgot about the time. They had been laughing quite loudly over Ben Weatherstaff and his robin, and Colin was actually as if he had forgotten about his weak back when he suddenly remembered something. You know, there is one thing we have never once thought of, he said. We are cousins. So queer that they had talked so much and never remembered the simple thing that they laughed over, because they had got into the humor to laugh at anything. And in the midst of the fun, the door opened, and in walked Dr. Craven and Mrs. Medlock. Dr. Craven stared in actual alarm, and Mrs. Medlock almost fell back because he had accidentally. Good Lord! Exclaimed poor Mrs. Medlock, with her eyes almost starting out of her head. Lord! What is this? Said Dr. Craven, coming forward. What mean? When Mary was reminded of the boy then Mary was reminded of Raja again. Colin answered as if neither the doctor's alarm nor Mrs. Medlock's terror was of the slightest consequence. He was as little disturbed or frightened as if a cat and dog had walked into the room. This is my cousin, Meg. I asked her to come and talk to me. I like her. She must come and talk to me whenever I. Dr. Craven turned reproachfully to Mrs. Medlock. Oh, sir, she panted, I did. How it happened? There's not a servant on the place that dare to talk. They all have their orders. Nobody told her anything, said Colin. She heard me herself. I am glad she came. Don't be silly, Medlock. Mary saw that Dr. Mott looked pleased, but it was quite plain that he dare not oppose his patient. He Colin and felt his pulse. I'm afraid there has been too much excitement. Excitement is not, boy, he said. I should be excited if she went away, answered Colin, his eyes beginning to look sparkling. I am better. She makes me better. The nurse must bring up mine. We will have tea together. Mrs. Medlock said doctor and doctor at each other in a troubled way, but there was evidently nothing to be done. He does, sir, ventured Mrs. Medlock, but thinking the matter over. He looked better this before she came into the room. She came into the room last night. She stayed with me alone. "She sang a Hindustani song to me, and it made me go to sleep," said Colin. "I was better when I wakened up. I wanted my breakfast. I want my tea now. Tell Nurse Med." Dr. Craven did not stay very long. He talked to the nurse for a few minutes, went into the room, and said a few words of warning to Colin. He must not talk too much, yet that he was ill. He must not forget that he was very easily tired, that there seemed to be a number of uncomfortable things he was not to forget. He looked fretful and kept his strange black-lashed eyes fixed on Dr. Craven's face. "To forget it," he said at last. "She makes me forget it. That is why I want her." He did not look happy when he left the room. He gave a puzzled glance at the little girl sitting on the. She had become a stiff, silent child again as soon as he entered, and he could see what the attraction was. The boy actually did look brighter, however, and he sighed down the corridor. They are always wanting me to eat things when I don't want Colin, as the nurse brought in the tea and put it on the table by the sofa. "Now I will. Those muffins look so nice and hot. Tell me about Rajas." Chapter 15. Nest Building. After another week, a high arch of blue sky appeared again, and the sun which poured down was quite hot. Though there had been no chance to see either the secret garden or Dickon, Mistress missed herself very much. The week had not seemed long. She had spent hours of every day in his room talking about Rajas, or gardens, or Dickon, and the cottage on the moor. Looked at the splendid books and pictures, and sometimes Mary had read things to Colin, and sometimes he to her. When he was amused and interested, she thought he scarcely looked like an invalid at all. It was so colorless, and he was always on the sofa. "You are a sly young one to listen if you're bed to go following things up like you did that night," Mrs. Medlock said. "But there's no saying it's not been a sort of blessing to the lot of us. He's not a tantrum or a whining fit since you made friends. The nurse was just going to give up the case because she was so sick of him, but she says she doesn't mind staying now you've gone on duty with," laughing a little. In her talks with Colin, Mary had tried to be very cautious about the secret. There were certain things she wanted to find out from him, but she felt that she must find them without asking him direct questions. In the first place, as she began to like him, she wanted to discover whether he was the kind of boy you could tell a secret to. He was not like Dickon, but he was evidently so pleased at the idea of a garden no one knew about that she thought perhaps he could be trusted. But she had not known him long enough to be sure. The second thing she wanted to find out was this: if he could be trusted. If he really could, wouldn't it be possible to take him to the garden without having anyone find it out? Mother had said that he must have fresh air, and Colin had said that he would not have fresh air in a secret garden. Perhaps if he had a great deal of fresh air and knew Dickon and saw things growing, he might not think so much about dying. Mary had seen herself sometimes lately when she had realized that she looked quite a different creature she had been when she arrived from India. This child looked nicer. Even Martha her. "The air in the moor has done thee good already," she had said. "Thou'rt not nigh so yeller, and thou'rt not nigh a scrawny. Even the hair does slamp down, and the head is so flat. It's spots in it so as it sticks out a bit." "It's like me," said Mary. "It's growing stronger. I'm sure there's more of it." "It looks it, for sure," said Martha, ruffling round her face. "Thou'rt not, thou'rt not half so ugly when it's that way. There's a bit of red in thy cheeks." If gardens and fresh air had been good for her, perhaps they would not for Colin. But then, if he hated people to look at him, perhaps he'd like to see Dickon. "Why does it make you angry when you are pleased, when you are looked at?" inquired one day. "I always hated it," he answered, "even when I was very little. When they took me to the seaside, I used to lie in my carriage. Everybody used to stare, and ladies talked to my nurse, and then they would begin to whisper, and I knew that they were saying I shouldn't live to grow up. Sometimes the ladies would pat my cheek and say, 'Poor child.' Once when a lady screamed so loud and bit her hand, she was so frightened she ran away." "She thought like a dog," said Mary, not at all admiringly. "I don't care what she thought. I wonder why you don't scream and bite me when I came into your room," said Mary. He began to smile slowly. "I thought you were a ghost or a dream," he said. "You can't bite or scream, and if you scream they don't care. Would you hate it if a boy lived?" Mary asked uncertainly. He lay back on his cushion and paused thoughtfully. "Boy," he said quite slowly, as if he were thinking over every word. "There's one boy I didn't mind. It's that boy who knows where the foxes live, Dickon." "I mind him," said Mary. "The birds don't and other animals," he said, still thinking it over. "That's why I shouldn't. He's a sort of animal charmer, and I am a boy animal." They laughed too. In fact, it ended in both laughing a great deal, and finding the idea of boy animal hiding in his hole very funny indeed. What afterwards was that she need not fear about Dickon. On that morning it was blue again. Mary wakened very early. The sun was pouring in slanted rays lines, and there was something so joyous in the sight of it that she jumped out of bed and ran. She drew up the blinds and opened the window itself, and a great waft of fresh scented air on her. The moor was blue, and the whole world looked as if something magic had happened to it. There were tender little fluting sounds here and there and everywhere, as if scores of birds were beginning for a concert. Mary put her hand out of the window and held it in the sun. "It's warm," she said. "It will make the green points push up and up and up, and it will make the roots work and struggle with all their might under the earth." She kneeled down and went out of the window as far as she could, breathing big breaths and sniffing the air until she laughed and remembered what Dickens's mother had said about the end of his nose quivering like a rabbit's. "It must be very early," she said. "The little clouds are all pink, and I've never seen the sky look. No one is up. I don't ever hear the stable boys." A sudden thought made her scramble. "I can't wait. I'm going to see the garden." She had learned to dress her time, and she put on her clothes in 5 minutes. She knew a small side door which bolted herself, and she flew downstairs in her stockinged feet and put on her in the hall. She unchained and unbolted and unlocked, and then the door was open. She swept the step with one bound, and there she was standing on the grass, which seemed to have turned green, and with the sun pouring